The alien queen declared, "No mercy." The human chuckled. Part 1. First contact, wrong move. The sky turned dark at 6:42 in the morning. Not the kind of dark that comes before rain. Not the kind that rolls in with clouds and wind. This was a different kind of dark. The kind that meant something enormous had moved between Earth and the sun. People all over the world stepped out of their homes, looked up, and went completely silent. There were ships up there, hundreds of them, maybe more. They were so large that they blocked out whole sections of the sky, like floating metal continents. Their hulls were black and gray, covered in lines and ridges that pulsed faintly with deep violet light. They made no sound. That was the part that scared people the most. Something that big should have made a sound. Instead, they just hung there, quiet, still, and enormous, like a threat that didn't need to say anything to be understood. Every television channel cut to static. Every radio station went silent. Every phone screen flickered and then showed the same thing. A single symbol, pulsing in violet, that no human had ever seen before. Then the voice came. It didn't come through any device. It came from the air itself somehow, in every language at once, perfectly clear, perfectly cold. People of Earth, you have been observed. You have been studied. You have been judged. The Velthari Empire has found your world suitable for absorption. You will surrender all governing authority, all military capability, and all territorial claim to your planet within 24 of your hours. Resistance will be met with total destruction. There will be no negotiation. There will be no second offer. The Queen speaks. And then it stopped. For about 10 seconds, the whole world was completely silent. Then, every baby on the planet started crying at the same time. Every dog started barking, and every government on Earth started making phone calls. His name was Do-hyun, and he was sitting in a small gray room underground when the sky went dark. He was 43 years old. He had a scar along his left jaw from a mission he never talked about. His hair was cut short and starting to go gray at the sides. He drank his coffee black. He slept 4 hours a night, and he had spent the last 11 years working as Earth's head of extraterrestrial diplomatic affairs, a job that, until this morning, most people thought was a joke position. Nobody was laughing now. He stood in front of a wall covered in screens, watching feeds from every major city on the planet. He watched the ships. He watched the people in the streets, looking up. He watched the panic starting to build like water behind a cracking dam. He held his coffee mug in both hands and said nothing for a long time. His assistant, a young woman named Ara, stood beside him with a tablet in her hands and genuine terror in her eyes. She was 26, brilliant, and had never once seen Do-hyun look afraid. She was very carefully watching his face right now. "Sir," she said, "the Global Council is asking who we send." "I know," Do-hyun said. "They want someone who—" "I know what they want," he said. He set his coffee down. "Tell them it's me." Ara opened her mouth, closed it, then said, "You're sure?" He picked up his jacket from the back of his chair and put it on slowly, like a man who had all the time in the world. "Yes." She looked at her tablet. "They're requesting a representative be transported to their command ship within 2 hours. Alone. They'll provide the transport." "Fine." "Do-hyun she." Her voice dropped. "They said no mercy." He looked at her. His face was calm, completely, almost unsettlingly calm. "They always say that," he said. The transport pod they sent was small and smelled like metal and something faintly chemical, like cleaning fluid mixed with ozone. There were no windows. Do-hyun sat in the single seat, hands resting on his knees, and did not move for the entire 12-minute ride up to the ship. When the pod doors opened, he stepped out into the Velthari command hall. It was enormous. The The ceiling was so high that the top of it was lost in shadow. The walls were lined with Velthari soldiers, tall, six-limbed creatures with smooth gray skin and 4 arms, 2 of which ended in something like hands, and 2 of which ended in something else entirely. They wore armor that shifted color slightly as they moved. Their faces were flat with wide-set eyes that glowed faintly orange in the low light. They were all completely still, watching him with expressions he could not read. At the far end of the hall, on a raised platform, sat Queen Vale. She was taller than the soldiers. Her skin was darker gray, almost blue, and her 6 eyes were the color of deep amber. She wore no armor, just robes of something that moved like liquid, even though she wasn't moving. Her 4 arms rested on the sides of her throne. She looked at Dothyun the way a person looks at something they've already decided the fate of. Dothyun walked toward her. His footsteps echoed. He stopped at a respectful distance, looked up at her, and said nothing. He just waited. Queen Vale let the silence stretch. That was usually enough to make representatives start talking, start pleading, start offering things. But this human just stood there, hands at his sides, looking up at her with an expression she could not place. She spoke. Her voice was translated instantly by the ship's systems into his language. "You are the representative of your world." "I am," Dothyun said. "Then you understand why you are here." "You want us to give up," he said. Simple, flat, like he was summarizing a grocery list. Her eyes narrowed, all 6 of them. "I want your species to make the only intelligent choice available to it. The Velthari Empire has absorbed 147 civilizations. Some fought. They no longer exist. The ones who surrendered were permitted to continue in a reduced capacity. That is the mercy we offer, and it is more than you deserve." She leaned forward slightly on her throne. "You have 24 hours, but I will tell you now as a courtesy what will happen if you refuse. Every city, every structure, every attempt at resistance, we will burn it all from orbit, and we will not stop until your world is silent. There will be no survivors left to regret the decision." She paused, letting it land. "No mercy will be given. The choice is yours, but it is not truly a choice. It is simply a matter of how much your species wishes to suffer before the end." The hall was completely silent. Every Velthari soldier waited. Queen Vale sat back, certain of what she would see. Fear, trembling, the desperate scrambling of a species facing its end. Dothyun tilted his head very slightly, and then he chuckled. It was a quiet sound, low, almost gentle, like something had just reminded him of a fond old memory. He just made that small sound, and shook his head slowly, like a man who had just heard something that was almost impressive in how wrong it was. The silence in the hall changed completely. Queen Vale had ruled for 412 years. She had received representatives from species whose technology surpassed her own. She had faced enemies that had nearly brought her empire to its knees. And in all of that time, across all of those centuries, in every negotiation, every surrender, every desperate final plea, nobody had ever chuckled. Her 6 eyes locked on him. Her 4 hands gripped the arms of her throne just slightly tighter than before. "What," she said very quietly, "is funny?" Dothyun looked up at her. His expression was calm. His eyes were clear. "I'll explain later," he said. "If there's time." To be continued in Part 2. The alien queen declared no mercy. The human chuckled. Part 2. What the Empire Doesn't Know. The transport pod brought Dothyun back to Earth in the same 12 minutes of cold silence it had taken to bring him up. He stepped out underground, back into the gray room with the wall of screens, and the first thing he saw was Ara standing there with 40 other people behind her. Generals, council members, scientists, aides, all of them staring at him like they expected him to be dead, like they were surprised the pod had returned with him in one piece. He looked at all of them. He took his jacket off and hung it on the back of his chair. "Make coffee," he said. "Enough for everyone. We have a long night." Nobody moved for a second. Then Ara turned around and quietly told someone to start the coffee machine. Do-hyun sat down and pulled up a screen. "I need General Boyan on a secure line, now." General Boyan was in the Southern Coordination Center when the call came through. She was 51 years old, short in height, but built in a way that made most people instinctively stand up a little straighter when she walked into a room. Her hair was pulled back tight. She had a habit of clicking a pen against her palm when she was thinking hard, and right now she was clicking it fast. She had been watching the feeds from Do-hyun's transport mission, audio only. The ship's systems had blocked visual, and she had heard every word the Velthari Queen had said. She had also heard the chuckle. When his face appeared on her screen, she looked at him for a moment and then said, "Was that on purpose?" "Yes," he said. "And you didn't do it just to annoy her?" "No," he said. "I did it because it was the honest reaction." She stopped clicking her pen. "Explain." He leaned forward. She gave the exact same speech, Boyan. Word for word, beat for beat. The exact same ultimatum that every empire, every warlord, every conqueror in human history has ever given. Surrender or burn. No mercy. The choice is yours, but it isn't really a choice. I've read those words in 100 different history books. She thought she was being terrifying. She was being textbook. Boyan was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "She doesn't know what we are." "No," Do-hyun said. "She knows what we look like. She knows our cities and our population numbers and our weapons lists. But she has never seen a species like us before, and she has no idea what she just started." Boyan looked at something off-screen for a moment. Then she looked back at him. "I'll brief the council in 2 hours. I want you in the room." "I'll be there," he said. "But first, how are the systems?" "Ready," she said. And for the first time that morning, she almost smiled. They have been ready for a long time. The briefing room was deep underground, beneath 300 meters of solid rock and reinforced concrete. It had no windows. The air was recycled and tasted faintly of metal. Around the long table sat the heads of every major defense body on the planet, military commanders, intelligence directors, and 3 scientists who had spent their careers working on something the public had never been told about. Boyan stood at the head of the table. She did not waste time. "The Velthari Empire has absorbed 147 civilizations," she said. "We know this because they told us. We believe it because their fleet is real, and their technology is real, and they are very clearly not here to make friends." She pulled up a holographic display above the table, a map of Earth, covered in thousands of small green dots. What they don't know is this. The green dots resolved into structures, bunkers, weapons caches, power systems, communication nodes. "For the past 30 years," she said, "every major nation on Earth has been quietly contributing to what we called the Continuity Network. Underground facilities on every continent, weapons platforms in the deep ocean, rail-based missile systems built into mountain ranges, drone manufacturing hubs that can operate without any surface power, communication arrays that run through fiber buried 6 meters underground, and can route around any node that goes dark." She paused. "The Velthari hit our satellites. We've already lost them. It doesn't matter. We don't need them." One of the generals, an older man named Woojin, leaned forward. "What's our response window if they strike?" 6 minutes from impact detection to full countermeasure activation, Boyan said. Woojin frowned. "That's fast. Because the assumption we built this whole system around is that any enemy from space would do exactly what the Velthari just did. They would hit our most visible infrastructure first. Our satellites, our broadcast towers, our government buildings, the things that look like the head of the snake. She tapped the table. So we made sure the snake has no head. The network runs itself. It doesn't need a central command. Every regional hub makes its own decisions based on preset protocols. You can destroy 100 of these nodes, and the rest keep functioning. The room was quiet. One of the scientists, a younger man named Taesung, spoke carefully. They've conquered 147 species. What makes us different? Boyan looked at him. Every species they conquered had one thing in common, she said. They had a center, a homeworld that meant everything, a capital that, if destroyed, would break the spirit of the whole civilization. A queen, a president, a high council, something that if you killed it, everyone else stopped fighting. She looked around the table. We don't work that way. We never have. Humans have been trying to conquer each other for 10,000 years, and it has never fully worked, because every time someone burns the center down, 1,000 smaller fires start somewhere else. We are the only species in known history that has been at constant war with itself for the entirety of its recorded existence. And somehow we are still here, still 7 billion strong, still building things and making art and having children. She let that sit for a moment. The Velthari studied us, she continued. They saw the wars, and they thought, good, they're divided, they're weak. They didn't understand that the wars were the training. Every conflict we survived made us harder to kill. Every time we lost everything and rebuilt, we got better at rebuilding. Every plague, every disaster, every extinction-level event that tried to end us just taught us how to survive the next one. Taesung was writing something down. He looked up. So we're not actually unprepared. We have been preparing since the first radio telescope picked up a signal in 2041 that we couldn't explain, Boyan said. 30 years, quietly, without ever telling the public, because we didn't want to panic. And because we knew, whoever was out there watching us, we didn't want them to know we'd noticed. Woojin sat back in his chair slowly. And the Velthari never detected the continuity network. Their sensors look for power signatures and metal concentrations near the surface, Boyan said. Everything we built is deep, dispersed, and shielded. To their scans, we look exactly like a pre-spaceflight species with a lot of cities and a lot of tanks. Which is exactly what we wanted them to think. Do-hyun spoke for the first time since the briefing began. He had been sitting at the far end of the table, just listening. They gave us 24 hours, he said. What do we tell them? Everyone looked at him. He looked at Boyan. She looked back at him. The pen was still in her hand, but she wasn't clicking it anymore. We tell them we're considering it, she said. We give them nothing that looks like defiance. We let them believe they've already won. And while they're waiting for our surrender, she turned back to the display, to the thousands of green dots spread across the planet. We finish waking everything up. Do-hyun nodded slowly. And if they strike before the 24 hours are up? Woojin asked. Boyan looked at him. Her voice was completely level. Then they find out what all the other empires found out. That hitting a human when they're not quite ready just makes them angry. And an angry human is a very specific kind of problem that nothing in this universe has ever been fully prepared for. The room was quiet again. Outside, 300 meters above them, the Velthari fleet hung in the sky like a dark ceiling over the whole world. Inside, for the first time since morning, the people in that room stopped looking afraid. They started looking like themselves. To be continued in Part 3. The alien queen declared no mercy. The human chuckled. Part 3. The first wave breaks. The 24 hours never finished. The Velthari struck at hour 19. Maybe Queen Vale got impatient. Maybe her generals convinced her that waiting was weakness. Maybe they decided that a species with primitive surface weapons and no space capability wasn't worth the courtesy of a full countdown. Whatever the reason, At 3:17 in the morning, when most of the world was either asleep or staring at the sky in the dark, the first strike came. It came from orbit. A focused energy pulse, the kind the Velthari had used on 14 other civilizations to wipe out command infrastructure in the opening minutes of a conquest. The idea was simple and had always worked before. Find the brain, destroy it, and the body collapses. No leadership means no coordination. No coordination means no resistance. No resistance means a clean and easy absorption. They targeted every major government building on Earth simultaneously. Parliament buildings, presidential palaces, military headquarters, defense ministries, broadcast towers, satellite uplink stations. All of it, in under 4 minutes, hit from orbit with surgical precision. And then Queen Vale waited for the silence. In the Southern Coordination Center, the first alarm went off at 3:17 and 4 seconds. General Boyan was already awake. She had not slept. She was standing in front of the main display when the impact reports started coming in, watching the red markers bloom across the surface map, one after another, like someone was pressing a hot iron against paper. She watched the Parliament building in the capital go offline. She watched the presidential compound take a direct hit. She watched 12 military headquarters across 4 continents go dark in under 3 minutes. She stood there and watched all of it. Then she turned to the room full of operators at their stations and said, very calmly, "Activate all nodes, full network, now." The room exploded into motion. The Velthari fleet sensors registered the first anomaly at 3:21, 4 minutes after the strike. The readings made no sense. A Velthari sensor officer stared at her display and then called her commander over because she genuinely thought something was wrong with the equipment. What she was seeing was not possible. The human surface network should have been collapsing. Comm signals dropping off, power grids going dark, military movements stopping as units lost contact with command. That was what always happened. That was what the conquest models predicted. Instead, the comm signals were growing, not just maintaining, actively increasing. New nodes were lighting up across the planet. Hundreds of them, then thousands, coming online in sequence, like someone was turning on lights in a dark house, one room at a time. Power signatures were appearing deep underground where no structure had been detected before. And movement, ground vehicle movement, large and coordinated, was beginning in at least 60 different locations simultaneously. The sensor officer said, very quietly to her commander, "They are not stopping." Her commander looked at the display for a long moment. Then he went to tell the queen. Doyun was coordinating from a bunker 2 kilometers underground in the eastern mountains. The bunker was not luxurious. It was concrete and steel and flickering fluorescent light, with rows of terminals and people working at all of them, and the constant background noise of keyboards and quiet voices reading out numbers. It smelled like coffee and sweat and recycled air. He stood at the center of it with a headset on, cycling between feeds, listening and occasionally speaking. He was not panicking. He was not rushing. He moved through the information the way a person moves through a house they know well in the dark, steady, certain, unhurried. "Eastern Drone Hub is active," someone called out. "Confirmed," Doyun said. "Tell them to hold pattern. Don't engage until Boyan gives the signal. Northern rail systems report ready. 12 launchers online. Stand by. We've got a Velthari dropship formation breaking from the main fleet. Looks like a ground insertion force. 40-plus craft, heading toward what used to be the capital." "Let them get low," Doyun said. "Let them think they're landing unopposed." Ara was beside him, tracking everything, her face tight with concentration. "They're going to figure out the network," she said quietly. "Not right away. But eventually, they'll scan deep enough. By then, it won't matter," he said. "They need to learn that first. They need to feel it. She looked at him. Feel what? He watched the dropship formation descend on the display. 40 craft, probably carrying a few thousand soldiers each. They were going to land in a city that looked empty and destroyed and defeated. What it's like, he said, when the ground fights back. The dropships landed in the ruins of the capital at 3:44 in the morning. The streets were empty. The buildings around them were dark. Fires burned in a few places from the orbital strike. It looked exactly like every other city the Velthari had pacified in the early hours of a conquest. Broken, quiet, abandoned. The Velthari soldiers moved out in formation. Smooth, disciplined, professional. They had done this on 14 worlds. Secure the area. Establish a perimeter. Begin rounding up whatever population remained for processing. It was clean work. It usually took a few hours. They were 40 seconds out of the dropships when the city woke up. Not all at once. One thing at a time. First, the lights came back on. Not in the buildings. In the street, where panels opened in the road and upward-facing floodlights blazed on, blinding the forward soldiers who had no warning and no eye protection rated for that brightness. Then, from the eastern end of the main avenue, 3 heavy drone units rose from underground vehicle bays, big, armored, remote-piloted machines that moved fast and were absolutely not on any surface scan the Velthari had ever done of this city. They opened fire at the dropships first, targeting engines, targeting landing struts, making sure nothing was going to lift off easily. Then the buildings opened. Just. Panels in the lower floors slid back, and the automated defense turrets behind them started tracking and firing with a speed and precision that no human hand was operating, because no human hand needed to. The system did it automatically, the way Boyan had designed it to do, the way it had been built to do, for 15 years. Velthari soldiers, trained and experienced and genuinely professional, did what any good soldiers would do. They took cover, they returned fire, they called for support. But the support was far away, and the city was very awake. The first hour of ground fighting cost the Velthari Empire more soldiers than the previous 6 conquests combined. That number would be hard to confirm from the human side, but the Velthari fleet sensors track their own casualty reports in real time, and the numbers climbing on Queen Vale's display were not the numbers that appeared in any of their conquest models. They weren't even close. On the ocean floor, 300 kilometers off the eastern coast, a series of launch platforms that the Velthari had never detected because they were sitting in 100-meter deep water with no active power signature, came online and began firing. The weapons they launched were not advanced by the Empire's standard. They were old technology by comparison. Kinetic projectiles, accelerated to hypersonic speed, guided by systems that didn't need satellite support, because they navigated by the planet's magnetic field. Simple, blunt, effective. 2 Velthari destroyer-class ships took hits before their point defense systems fully registered the threat. One of them lost primary propulsion and began to drift. The other took damage to its port side that it could repair, but not quickly. On the command flagship, Queen Vale's most senior general, a creature named Voss, who had served her for 200 years, stood before her and said something he had never said to her in all that time. "My queen," he said, carefully, "the surface is not behaving as expected." She was looking at the display. Her 6 eyes moved across it slowly. The casualty numbers, the new power signatures blooming underground, the 2 damaged destroyers, the drone units still active in the capital, despite 3 targeted strikes against them. "They hid," she said. "Yes," Voss said, "extensively, deeply. The network they are operating from did not appear in any of our pre-strike scans." "How long have they had it?" "The construction depth and dispersal pattern suggests at least 20 to 30 years. Queen Vale was quiet for a moment. "They knew we were coming," she said. "Or they knew someone would," Voss said. Eventually, she turned her head and looked at him. They were preparing while we were watching them. Yes, my queen. She looked back at the display. Her expression did not change, but something behind her eyes shifted. It was a small thing, a subtle thing, a thing that none of her generals had ever seen before. She was not afraid. Velthari queens did not get afraid. But she was, for the first time in 4 centuries, not entirely certain. Pull the ground forces back, she said. Regroup. I want new scans, deep scans. I want to know everything that is underground on that planet. And get me the human representative again. Voss bowed and left. Queen Vale sat on her throne in the quiet of her command hall and stared at the display and thought about that sound, that small, quiet, almost gentle sound the human had made when she told him there would be no mercy. She was beginning to understand what it meant. To be continued in Part 4. The alien queen declared no mercy. The human chuckled. Part 4. The human doctrine. 3 weeks into the war, the Velthari Empire had not won a single ground engagement. This was not something that had ever happened before. In every previous conquest, the ground phase was the easy part. By the time boots reached the surface, the population was broken, the infrastructure was gone, and the remaining soldiers, if any, were fighting out of desperation rather than strategy. Ground operations were cleanup. They were the final step. They were not supposed to be the hardest part. On Earth, 3 weeks in, the Velthari ground forces had tried 17 major insertions across 4 continents and had been pushed back from every single one of them. Not destroyed, not routed in a panic. Pushed back, deliberately, carefully, as if the humans were choosing how much to let the Velthari advance before they took it back. As if they were controlling the pace. General Voss had started to wonder, in the quiet of his own mind, if that was exactly what was happening. He didn't share this thought with Queen Vale. Not yet. General Boyan had not slept more than 2 hours in any given night for the past 3 weeks. She didn't look it. That was the thing that unnerved the people who worked around her. She looked the same as she always did. Pulled back hair, straight posture, pen in hand. The dark circles under her eyes were there, if you looked closely. But you had to look closely. And most people were too focused on doing their jobs to notice. She was coordinating 7 active theaters simultaneously. Northern Defense Corridor, Southern Coast, 3 inland regions, 1 situation in the east that was developing into something more complicated than expected, and the ongoing underground logistics chain that kept all of it running. She worked through all of it with the steady, methodical focus of someone who had spent 30 years building exactly this system for exactly this situation, and therefore was not in any meaningful sense surprised by what was happening. She had planned for this. She had wargamed it. She had run the models hundreds of times. The models said it would be hard. The models were right. But the models also said humanity would still be standing after 3 weeks. Those models were right too. It was during the 4th week that Do-hyun asked for the broadcast. He brought it to Boyan first. He showed her exactly what he wanted to do. A direct transmission, open frequency, sent to the Velthari fleet in their own language, using the translation matrix they had reverse-engineered from the Queen's first broadcast. Boyan read through it twice. She set it down on the table between them. "You want to explain ourselves to them," she said. "Not explain," he said. "Educate." "There's a difference? Explaining is defensive," Do-hyun said. "Educating is informational. I'm not trying to justify what we are. I'm just trying to make sure they fully understand what they're dealing with before this goes any further." Boyan tapped the paper with 1 finger. This could make them angrier. "Good," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "It might also scare them enough to do something drastic," she said. "If the Queen feels cornered, a cornered enemy makes mistakes. And right now, she's making very careful, controlled mistakes because she thinks she still has a plan. I want to take the plan away from her." He paused. The quickest way to win this, without losing everything, is to make her realize she's already lost. But she won't believe that from a battle report. She'll just adjust her strategy. She needs to hear it in a way she can't argue with. Boyan was quiet for a while. The pen clicked against her palm twice. Then she said, "Send it." The broadcast went out at noon on the 26th day of the war. Every Velthari ship in orbit received it. Every soldier on the ground with a comm unit received it. It was impossible to jam, because it was sent through 17 different transmission points simultaneously, some of them underground. And by the time the fleet realized what was happening, it had already been running for 4 minutes. Dohyun's voice came through clearly, in the Velthari language, calm and unhurried. He did not threaten. He did not boast. He talked about history. He started 10,000 years ago. He told them about the first human cities, the walls they built, the wars they fought, the way one empire would rise and burn another to the ground, and then get burned to the ground itself by someone else 50 years later. He talked about the plagues, the ones that killed a third of a continent's population at a time, the ones that came back in different forms every generation for centuries. He talked about the famines, the floods, the droughts. He talked about the wars, the small ones and the world-spanning ones that involved every nation at once and killed tens of millions of people in the space of a few years. And then he pointed out quietly that humanity was still here. He didn't say it triumphantly. He said it matter-of-factly, the way you would tell someone the temperature outside. The plagues came, and they lost millions, and they buried their dead, and rebuilt, and had more children. The empires fell, and new ones rose. The great wars ended, and the survivors went home and planted crops, and started businesses, and built universities. Every single time, every fire, every collapse, every moment where it would have been perfectly reasonable for the species to simply stop and give up. They didn't. Not because they were noble, not because they were particularly wise, because it simply never occurred to them to stop. He talked about the continuity network then. He described it, not in terms of weapons or capabilities, but in terms of what it represented. 30 years of quiet, patient preparation. An entire species that watched the stars with radio telescopes, detected an unexplained signal, and collectively decided, without telling most of their own people, to spend 3 decades getting ready. Not panicking, not freezing, getting ready. Because that was what humans did with problems. They identified them, and they worked on them, and they did not stop working on them until the problem was solved or they were dead. He said, finally, "You have absorbed 147 civilizations. We know this. We have known this since we first intercepted your long-range comm signals 11 years ago and had them translated. We know what your empire does. We know how it works. We know the models you use and the stages you follow and the timeline you expected for absorbing us. We have been preparing for every stage of that timeline for a very long time. You have not encountered a civilization in your history that knew you were coming and had 30 years to think about what to do. You are encountering one now." Another pause, longer. "We don't want to destroy you. We have no interest in your empire's territory, or your fleet, or your queen's throne. We want our planet. We want our people. We want to be left alone. That's all we have ever wanted." His voice stayed completely level. "But if you continue this war, we will fight it the way humans have always fought wars, for as long as it takes, with everything we have, and then with things we haven't thought of yet. We will adapt to every strategy you use. We will find the gaps in every weapon system you deploy. And we will not stop. Not in a year, not in 10 years, not in a generation. We will not stop." He let the silence run for 5 full seconds. "Consider what 148 means," he said, "and then consider what it would mean to be the first empire that tried to take humanity and failed." The transmission ended. On the flagship, Queen Vale listened to all of it, She sat perfectly still on her throne, while Do-hyun's voice filled the command hall, translated in real time. Around her, her generals and officers listened too. No one spoke, no one moved. When it ended, the hall stayed silent for almost a full minute. Then General Voss said quietly, "My queen, there is something you should see." He pulled up the deep scan results they had finally gotten back from the planet's surface. Real deep scans, the kind that took 3 weeks to properly compile, the kind that showed what was actually in the ground. The display lit up with thousands of points: underground facilities, manufacturing hubs, power systems, weapons platforms, storage depots, communication arrays, all of it deep, all of it shielded, all of it connected. It covered every continent. It was everywhere. Queen Vale looked at it for a long time. She thought about what Do-hyun had said. 30 years of preparation. She thought about the timeline of her empire's contact with Earth, the signal they had detected 40 years ago, the observation missions, the decision to move on the planet made roughly 32 years ago. All of it in the Velthari's own records. All of it in the window the humans would have had to notice. They had noticed. They had started building all of this while her fleet was still decades away. She looked at the display. She looked at the scale of it. She thought about the ground forces she had lost. She thought about the 2 destroyers still undergoing repair. She thought about the 17 failed insertion operations, and the way every single one of them had been pushed back, like the humans were setting a pace. She thought about the Chuckle. She finally understood it now. He had not laughed at her power. He had not laughed at her threat. He had laughed because she thought she was introducing herself to a species that didn't know what was coming. And they had known for 30 years. She turned to Voss. "Get me a secure channel to the human representative," she said. Her voice was completely steady. Her expression gave nothing away. She was 412 years old, and she had maintained her composure through wars and betrayals and the deaths of people she had genuinely cared about. But when she turned back to look at the display, at all those thousands of green dots Do-hyun's people called their continuity network, her hand, just for a moment, pressed flat against the arm of her throne. Not in anger. In something much closer to respect. To be continued in Part 5. The alien queen declared no mercy. The human chuckled. Part 5. No mercy returned. The neutral station was small. It orbited at a point exactly halfway between the Velthari fleet's current position and Earth's upper atmosphere, a location agreed upon in less than an hour of back-and-forth communication, which was itself unusual. The Velthari were not known for agreeing to things quickly. But Queen Vale had told General Voss to move fast, and when the Queen said move fast, people moved fast. The station was old. It had been built by humanity 12 years ago as a deep space observation post, and repurposed twice since then. Once as a refueling stop for long-range probes, and once as a test site for the early communication arrays that eventually became part of the continuity network. It was small, bare, functional, and exactly the kind of place where nobody would feel like they had an advantage, which was the point. He came in a 2-person shuttle with Aura, who sat in the co-pilot seat and didn't say much for the whole trip up. She had her tablet. She was going over documents. When they docked and the airlock cycled open, she handed him a folder. "Everything she might bring up," Aura said. "Every angle. We ran the scenarios last night." He took the folder. "Did we cover the one where she just decides to bomb everything from orbit instead of meeting?" Aura looked at him. "That's not funny." "I wasn't joking," he said. "Did we cover it?" "Boyon has 4 response protocols active right now," she said. "If anything comes out of that fleet that looks like a weapons lock, we'll know before it fires." "Good," he said, and tucked the folder under his arm and stepped through the airlock. Queen Vale arrived 20 minutes later. She came in a ship much larger than the shuttle, a command vessel that docked on the far side of the station with a heavy mechanical clunk that Do-Yun felt through his boots, even through the station's hull. He was already sitting at the single table in the station's meeting room when the far door opened. She walked in with 4 guards and no General Voss, which he noted. Voss was the one who had looked at him like a problem to be solved. The guards were purely physical, large, armored, there to stand in corners and look imposing. Queen Vale herself wore no armor, just the same robes he had seen in the command hall, moving like liquid, even in the station's recycled air. She was taller than the doorframe. She had to angle her head slightly to come through it. She sat down across from him. For a moment, they just looked at each other. The same way they had looked at each other in the command hall, a month ago, before the world changed. Except this time, the silence felt different. Less like the moment before a threat, more like the moment before something honest. "You knew we were coming," she said. "Yes," he said. "How long ago did you detect our approach signal?" 31 years ago, he said, give or take a few months. She was quiet for a moment. "We sent no signal 31 years ago." "You sent low-band navigation pulses," he said. "Your fleet uses them automatically. We weren't looking for them specifically. We just happened to have a telescope array pointed in the right direction for a long-range atmospheric survey. And a researcher named Taesung noticed a pattern in the data that didn't match anything natural." He paused. He spent 3 years trying to convince people he wasn't wrong. Eventually, they checked his math. She looked at him. "And then you started building." "And then we started building," he said. She folded 2 of her 4 hands on the table. The other 2 rested at her sides. "The broadcast you sent," she said. "The history lesson." "Yes." "It was accurate?" "Every word," he said. She was quiet again for longer this time. Through the small viewport in the far wall of the meeting room, he could see a slice of earth, curved, blue, wrapped in white cloud. He had been looking at it on and off since he sat down. But he knew it was there. "Why did you laugh?" she asked. Her voice was not angry. It was something else, something almost careful. "In my command hall, when I gave you the ultimatum, every representative I have ever received, from species far more powerful than yours, reacted with fear, with pleading, with attempts at bargaining. You made a sound I have never heard in 400 years of this work." Do-Yun thought about how to say it simply. He had thought about this question for a month, knowing it would come. "Because I've heard your speech before," he said. "Not from you specifically, but from people exactly like you. I grew up reading history, human history, which is mostly a very long record of people telling other people that the choice is already made, and the outcome is already decided, and there is no point in fighting." He rested his hands on the table between them. Every single one of those people was wrong. Every single empire that said it would last forever didn't. Every single conqueror who said a people were finished wasn't right. Not one of them. And when you sat on your throne and told me there would be no mercy, and that the choice wasn't really a choice, he almost smiled. "It wasn't arrogance. I wasn't mocking you. I recognized the speech. And I knew, the way you know something you've seen 100 times before, exactly how it was going to end." Queen Vale looked at him for a long time. "You were certain," she said. "I was," he said. "Even with our fleet above your world?" "Even then." She turned her head slightly and looked at the viewport, at the blue curve of Earth. She looked at it for a while the same way he had been looking at it, not staring, but aware of it, knowing it was there. "I have ended civilizations," she said. Her voice was still steady, but there was something underneath it now that hadn't been there in the command hall. Something that sounded almost like age, the weight of 400 years of decisions that could not be unmade. Some of them were strong. Some of them were wise. Some of them had art and music and science that I will not see again because I ordered their worlds burned. She paused. It was always the right decision for the Empire. The Empire needs territory. It needs resources. It needs to grow. She paused again. But it does not need enemies that do not stop. Enemies like that are not conquests. They are wounds. Do-hyun said nothing. He let her speak. The Empire has never retreated, she said. I have never ordered a withdrawal. In 412 years, I have never sat across a table from an enemy who was not already broken by the time I chose to negotiate. She looked back at him. Her 6 amber eyes were steady, unreadable, ancient. I do not know what to do with you. He reached into the folder Ara had given him and pulled out a single document. He slid it across the table. She looked at it. She didn't pick it up immediately. She read it from where it sat, her eyes moving across the text slowly. It was not a peace treaty. There were no surrender terms. There were no conditions attached to the cessation of hostilities, no reparations demanded, no territories claimed. It was a proposal, clean and simple and short enough to fit on 2 pages. A proposal for alliance. Access to routes through human-monitored space in exchange for recognition of Earth's sovereignty. A shared early warning system for deep space threats. An open communication channel, permanent, staffed by both sides. A standing offer of technical and medical exchange. Nothing about the war. Nothing about what had been destroyed. Nothing about the ships damaged or the soldiers lost on both sides. Just what came next. Queen Vale read it through to the end. Then she picked it up and read it again. You're not asking for an apology, she said. No, he said. You're not asking for compensation. No. You're offering us something. Yes. She set the document down very carefully. Why? He thought about it for a moment. Not because he didn't know the answer, because he wanted to say it right. Because we've been alone out here for a long time, he said. And we know there are other things in the dark. Things we haven't seen yet. Things that make your empire look small by comparison maybe, or that make both of us look small. He looked at her steadily. We're not interested in being your enemy. We never were. We just needed you to understand that we're not going to be your territory either. He nodded toward the document. That's what's left, if you want it. Queen Vale sat with the document in her 4 hands. Through the viewport, Earth turned slowly. Clouds moved across its surface. Somewhere down there, Boyan was watching a display and waiting. Somewhere down there, Ara was in the shuttle reviewing the backup scenarios. Somewhere down there, 8 billion people were living their lives, rebuilding, replanting, repairing, doing what humans always did after something tried to break them. The Queen set the document down and placed one hand over it. She picked up the single writing instrument that had been left on the table, a human pen, black ink, cap removed. She looked at it for a moment. It was a very small thing in her large hand, almost absurdly small. She signed her name. She set the pen down and slid the document back across the table. Do-hyun looked at the signature. Then he looked up at her. For what it's worth, he said, I think you made the right call. Queen Vale stood. Her guards moved to follow. She paused at the doorway, head angled to clear the frame, and looked back at him one final time. The sound you made, she said, in my command hall, I have been thinking about it for a month. I know, he said. Teach me, she said, what it means. He considered that for a moment. It means, he said, that you've seen this before, that you know how it ends, that you're not afraid, not because there's nothing to be afraid of, but because fear isn't the thing you're feeling. He paused. It means you're ready. She looked at him for one more long moment. Then she turned and walked back to her ship. Boyan was in the Southern Coordination Center when the signal came through, a single green confirmation ping from the station. She had been standing, per her habit, in front of the main display. Around her, the room had gone very quiet as they waited. When the ping appeared, she looked at it for a moment. Then she set her pen down on the console in front of her. She didn't click it. She just set it down. Around her, the room started to exhale. Slowly, people leaning back in chairs, pressing hands over their faces. A few quiet sounds that might have been laughs, or might have been something else. Someone started clapping, and then a few more people joined, and then the room was making noise. Real noise, the kind that comes from a month of held breath, finally letting go. Boyan stood in the middle of it, and looked at the display. The Velthari fleet was still up there. Still large, still real. But one by one, over the next 20 minutes, the weapon signatures on her screen went from active to standby. Then from standby to cold. Ship by ship, the fleet was standing down. She watched it happen. Then she looked out of habit at the spot on the display where Earth's surface was mapped. All the green dots of the continuity network, still lit, still active, still ready if they needed to be. They had built it because they knew something was coming. They had been right. They had used it exactly once. She thought about what Dohan had said in that first briefing, that humans don't fight to win. They fight because stopping doesn't occur to them. She thought about all the people who had built this network over 30 years, the engineers who never told their families what they were working on, the soldiers who ran exercises in bunkers and came home and said nothing, the scientists like Taesung, who spent years being told they were wrong before someone finally checked the math. All of them, building something for a threat they hoped would never come, because they knew, the way humans always know, that hope wasn't enough. Preparation was. She picked her pen back up. "All right," she said, to the room that was still celebrating around her. "We have a lot of rebuilding to do. Let's get started." Outside, the sky was just beginning to get light. For the first time in a month, people looked up at it and saw the sun rising. Not because the ships were gone. They weren't. Not yet. But because the sky, this morning, felt like it belonged to them again. And somewhere very far above, on a neutral station between a fleet and a world, a human pen sat on a table, next to a 2-page document, signed in 2 different scripts. The beginning of something none of their history books had a word for yet.